Okay, we're going to get started. Thanks everyone for joining. This is a session and a panel discussion about business intelligence in the real world using Hadoop. My name is Sanjay Mathur. I'm the founder and CEO of a new venture called Silicon Valley Data Science. We've put together a team of data scientists, engineers, and platform experts to help data-driven companies create new capabilities, identify critical insights, and frankly solve their difficult problems. I'm joined by three very esteemed panelists who are far more interesting than I am. To my left here is Drew Hylbert. He's the VP of Technology and Infrastructure at Opower. If you live here in Northern California and you use PG&E, you're a beneficiary of Opower's capabilities, and I'll let Drew explain what that is in just a sec. I asked each of the panelists actually to tell me about their journeys with Hadoop, and in lieu of telling you all about their backgrounds and what they do at their companies, because you can read about them online, I thought I'd share a little bit about their Hadoop journeys. In Drew's case, Opower's got a massive amount of time series data from over 90 utilities. And Drew said to me that we wouldn't have had the ability to process the data or do analytics on the data in the time frame that they wanted to without using Hadoop. So that's an interesting thing that he'll talk about. Next to Drew is Paddy Hannon. Paddy is VP of Architecture at Edmunds.com. Paddy was telling us almost a very similar story. His had more to do with marketing analytics. And he said that they wouldn't have been able to reconcile paid spend with revenue per session if it weren't for Hadoop. It was costing them too much on their legacy architecture to generate the analytics that they needed. And to his left is Pete Schlampp. Pete Schlampp is VP of Product at Platfora, which is the sponsor for this session. Peter's actually a reformed medical professional who realized that product management in the Valley was a lot more fun. And the interesting thing about having him as part of the discussion is he's talked to over 300 organizations about their pipelines and how they get data and how they do business intelligence and obviously feeding into the product that they make. And he's going to share his insights from that side. I want to call something out for all of you and let you know that at the end of this session, Paddy is going to be auctioning off a Tesla Model S, and Drew is going to be giving away free electricity. So, please stay to the end to find out about that. All right. What we wanted to do today was really talk about how enterprises adapt to Hadoop and do business intelligence with Hadoop and that entire ecosystem that's there. So I've come up with some questions and had great help from a colleague at Platfora that I'm going to throw out for the team here and kind of ask them to share their journeys with you. Our hope is that by hearing their stories, you can relate it to some of the challenges that you're probably facing at your enterprise and learn from probably some of the good things that they did, and hopefully you guys will share some of the mistakes that you made as well. So the first question that I'll start with is, what were you trying to accomplish in your business intelligence journey? What were your goals? What were your needs? What made you consider using Hadoop? So Drew, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. Yep, thank you. So as you mentioned before, we ingest large amounts of energy consumption data from utilities and in an effort to serve that data back to consumers in ways that get them to change their behaviors and how they use energy. And the nice thing about that, aside from, well, obviously there's challenges with it, which I'll get to in a second, but the nice thing about it is not particularly transactional, meaning that we get large batches of data in and it doesn't change, aside from a very small amount of corrections that come in. And that type of profile lends itself well to a system like Hadoop. And we were in a situation where we were getting more and more clients, great business problems to have, but doing all the processing we needed to do in MySQL, which we were using previously, was just not going to allow us to generate the amount of insights we needed to generate, both in terms of latency as well as coverage, so that we could get insights to consumers as quickly and as effectively as possible. And having had experience with Hadoop and weblog data, which I think everyone, some people from Yahoo or Google, it did lend itself to that similar model. And so that was our first foray into Hadoop at Opower, was to move our usage data into Hadoop and then to start generating our insights on it.
What was the trigger? What created that need for you guys? Was it a cost trigger? Was it a business driver where you wanted to put new products and offerings out?
The specific business driver was a product that we delivered in early 2012 called bill forecasting. And this is an interesting feature. It seems simple, but we need to look at large amounts of data, sometimes 3 years of data, weather data, in order to forecast what a user's bill may be at the end of the month. And this was a product that's live for PG&E customers now. And PG&E is a very large utility, and we really just had no way to produce a daily bill forecast in the SLA that PG&E wanted unless we moved to a distributed compute model. And so that's really when we thought, you know what, we got to go into Hadoop now. And it was not easy to take a new team and do that, but we are generating bill forecasts for PG&E and other customers right now, and we're successful in meeting our SLAs.
Very cool. Paddy?
So our journey started with a lot of pain. We were a traditional data warehouse group, so we had Oracle database, we're using Informatica, we're using all the sort of basic tools, and we were getting more and more data. So we stopped just collecting page view data, but we were collecting data intra-page view and also trying to pull in records for vehicle transactions, vehicle sales, and incoming inventory, and trying to mash all that data together in our traditional warehouse was becoming really painful. We were getting, it was taking 8+ hours of process on a nightly basis. If something failed, you had to restart that process, and pretty soon you run into a point where you can't possibly catch up. So if you look in our older warehouse, we're now completely on Hadoop, but if you look at our older warehouse, there's like missing weeks of data which we use to recognize revenue, so that's sort of a problem. The other part of it was more of a business issue where the traditional way of building reporting was you'd have a business analyst say, here's a report that I need. You would kind of figure out what data points were necessary, maybe what aggregates might be needed. You designed a star schema. You built an ETL process, sourcing the data from wherever you needed to source it from, run through the pipeline, have somebody build a report, and then the business analyst would say, oh, that's not quite what I wanted. I don't want that field, I want this field. And you start over again. And when I took over the data warehouse team, every time a new project came on, it was like a 3 to 6 month thing. And I wanted that to go a lot faster. I came from the web development world. I was used to 3-week iterations. We'd throw up a web page and we'd see how it worked. And I didn't understand why we couldn't do that in the data warehouse. So we really saw Hadoop as a way of creating a more agile process for data warehousing, where I could land data as raw as possible and then allow the business users to play with it, or allow analysts to play with it in a way that they could quickly get to a point where they say, here's exactly what I want, and then we would go build that.
Okay.
That really was the main thing was, one, the system was just grinding to a halt. It was taking us a long time to build anything new, and the actual development process wasn't as agile, and I wanted it to become much more agile and iterative.
Interesting. So Peter, a comment that Paddy just made kind of strikes me as something you could give insight on. Is that the common challenge that you're seeing in all these organizations that you talk to? Is it quite common that it is a time-to-market issue? The traditional ETL through DW and OLAP at the front end, is that just too slow for the business? What are you seeing when you investigate business intelligence problems?
Well, one of the things I like about having both Drew and Paddy up here is the drivers, I think, are the two most common drivers that I hear all the time. One, Drew said, hey, our data tends to be the same, but volume is very, very high. And so I hear a lot of companies saying, and customers saying, I want to stop worrying about size. When it comes to running reports or doing some sort of analysis, size should not be one of the factors that I'm thinking about. And then Paddy, he said this word agility, which is something that we hear all the time as well. So not worrying about size and being able to be more agile. As a proxy for some other companies that have done this, let me relay a story of one of our customers who's an online gaming company, and their problem, the issue that they wanted to solve with BI on Hadoop was absolutely core to their business. They develop video games, and as users are playing the video games, developers are actually changing the game while the game's actually being played. And so developers are in there adding characters, or they're adding weapons, or coins or something like this. And they needed to be able to make changes to the game in real time and be able to analyze and measure those things as the changes were being made. The old school way of doing it, the way that Paddy just described it, of, hey, I'm going to collect some data, I'm going to extract it, transform it in some way, I'm going to insert it into a data warehouse, and then weeks later I'm going to be able to analyze this and make some call on whether it was a good move or bad move to add this character. was absolutely impossible for their business. And so they were an agile company to begin with, but the old technology of being able to do BI would hold them back from being able to execute their business. So, I think of that capability of making your business agile through collecting different data and analyzing it rapidly as one of the big benefits of doing BI and Hadoop.
And it actually just makes you even more agile, right? So the A/B testing is something that we're doing a lot of, and in the past we had to do the same thing. We had to wait for a report to come out to say, yeah, this was a great feature or this wasn't a great feature. Right now we have an A/B test dashboard. Hadoop powers the whole ETL process, and they can see pretty much every day or even intraday the impact of what they're doing on the website. So wanting to be agile for the sake of cleaning up the data warehouse development process has actually made us more agile on our product side. So it's actually been transformative here at Edmunds.
So looking at that platform that each of you faced, at least Paddy and Drew, on making a choice to change, you then got to fill in the rest of that pipeline, right? You had legacy on both ends in some sense, not to insult what you'd built over time, but you're now trying to insert this new data infrastructure in the middle of that. What other choices did you have to make? Did you have to go through and look at new ETL tools that were either, copacetic with Hadoop or had something that would work for you? Were you looking at other transformations? And ultimately, I'd love to hear about what analytic tools you're using to actually do the BI once you went through the transformation. So maybe, Drew, start with you. You made the decision, okay, we're going to go look at Hadoop. I'm sure you did some piloting. What other choices did you have to make?
Yeah, so previous to Opower, I had some experience with just the pure open source version of Hadoop and using it really for non-mission critical use cases. And we also had a systems operations team that was used to managing thousands of servers, and Opower was in a situation where we weren't used to really managing thousands of servers, and we also really had no experience with operating Hadoop. So at first it was literally, how can I reduce risk of bringing this technology into the company? I will say that Hadoop is somewhat of an easier choice for us just because we are already a Java shop. And I do think that's worth mentioning. I mean, there's a significant amount of value derived from the platform if you're already used to writing Java code. And that was an advantage for us, having a large Java stack already. But you had to pick a distro. Obviously, that's there's many out there. Knowing your usage patterns up front was helpful, and so we did go through exercises in how we were going to use this platform, and what distros had better coverage of the new features in the open source for whether HBase or Hive, and then which distros could support our use case. We knew from the start that we were going to need to use HBase because we didn't just want to process all the time series data in batch, but we wanted to use it as a source of record, which means we're going to need to do real-time low latency lookups of individual values in the store, and so we knew we needed good support for HBase, and back then Cloudera was kind of leading the edge there, and so we went with Cloudera, and that was a big choice for us because once you choose that, there is incentive and value in using the other. And using the other pieces in the ecosystem, and so, but getting back to your question, we're the other choices we had to make. ETL is very important. Job scheduling is very important. We're maybe not a great example of that because we ended up building our own in both of those cases, and not so much because of the lack of the project. It was just some special circumstances on our part. In the case of Uzi from job scheduling, we felt that we could implement that functionality fairly trivially, but we could add on a lot of more customer-specific criteria to our job scheduling. We have very low tolerance for miscalculation of data in Hadoop and data freshness. And then in the case of how we get data into it, we're faced with a problem, which is Ruby. And we use Ruby extensively within Opower, and Ruby doesn't play particularly nice with Hadoop, and so that was another reason why we said, okay, well, we should probably figure out one standard way that people can get data into our system with the different technologies we're using. Another reason that we needed to build forward or build our internally, but I think to your point, we did go through exercises in most cases of thinking about that stuff up front and making these choices.
How long was that journey from the point that you decided to go down this path to the point where you feel like you had some of it in production? Months?
Oh,
years?
all right. Some of it production is different than being good at it.
Yeah, that's why I didn't go that far.
Let's see. We took delivery of our, cluster It was almost a year, I'll say. We started to talk about using Hadoop in June of 2011, and we launched bill forecasting in production at scale really about a year later.
Okay.
And of course, getting hardwares, we run our own colo, other requests of our customers. So there's those issues of getting the hardware in and burning it in, and so that added a little bit to the delay. But yeah, it was a year endeavor before we're in production.
And we're sort of a similar story. We had a small data warehouse team that were very data warehouse. They were specialists in data warehousing, and we had a floor full of Java engineers. And when I took over the team, I looked around and I said, well, I can go out and scale by hiring more specialists, or I can look at the staff we already have and leverage them. So Hadoop was sort of in a certain sense, a no-brainer in that respect, right? We could leverage in-house knowledge. We already have an automated deployment pipeline. We have, testing harnesses, and we have Chef and all that kind of stuff to build out our hardware infrastructure. And I wanted to do the same pattern for our Hadoop infrastructure. So that ruled out a lot of tooling. A lot of the commercial tooling sometimes doesn't play well with source control and automated deployments and all that sort of stuff. So we ended up using Uzi for everything. We wrote all our own MapReduce jobs. We had a bunch of Java engineers. We're heavily leveraging HBase, so we went the Cloudera route as well. This was about 18 months ago, a little more than 18 months ago now. We went live in December, where we completely turned off our old warehouse. We didn't view it as a migration. So when we started the project, the head of business analytics held up this list of like 300 or 400 reports and said, how are you going to move all of these? And I said, well, we're not going to move them. We're going to start over. And so in that sense, it wasn't inserting something in the middle, it was running them side by side. And the real trick was finding some way of delivering value. So we kind of floundered for a while, honestly. For the first 6 months, we really floundered and we weren't quite sure how to get started. We were bringing data in, but it didn't really feel like we had a lot of traction. And the head of analytics actually came up with a really good idea, which is the paid marketing subject area, which is the first area that we really built out in a production system. And what it allowed us to do was do something that we hadn't been able to do in our Oracle warehouse because we just couldn't crunch enough data. So we were able to take our clickstream data, take our ad revenue data, and take our paid marketing data and show how much we were spending to acquire visitors on a per-click basis, essentially. And by doing that and showing that win, it's not that we added more people to the team or anything, it's just the team kind of felt like, oh my gosh, we just did something really cool, and their velocity started increasing. And it just, from there on out, it stopped being a battle to convince people that Hadoop was the way to go. It was now, oh my gosh, we have this new capability, what other new capabilities are we going to be able to get? Okay. So that was a long process, but it's been really.
I appreciate the candor on floundering. I think it's a bold decision to take an existing architecture that works and undo it and go in a different direction.
And we did it with no data warehouse developers. I mean, we just used regular Java. I mean, these guys had never dealt with the volumes of data that we were dealing with. We had an advantage. We have a data publishing system, so getting data into HBase, we didn't have to deal with that very much because we already send messages using Thrift for most of our data.
Sure.
So we could just read the Thrift IDL and create HBase table structures automatically from the Thrift IDL, right? So getting the data in, once we kind of figured that out, became pretty trivial, actually.
Okay. Peter, I want to ask you kind of a parallel question to this. So you must have made a lot of presumptions at Platfora as you were building your product on Hadoop deployment, Hive usage, HBase usage, on what you're doing at that upper level of business intelligence. What did you see playing out in the marketplace that maybe you can share with the audience on choices that people were making? We heard from these guys on the choices they made to go from legacy into enabling a new analytic infrastructure. What have you seen?
Sure. So when the company started back in 2011, it seemed like, and we started going out and speaking to customers like these guys, it seemed like the only answer was to put data in Hadoop, expose it through Hive, and then have an existing BI tool talk to it. It was actually interesting when I started going out and interviewing people, the number of people that had actually just given up. And so floundering, I think, is an interesting word. I think a lot of people felt like they had made a big investment. They had made they had probably risked personal credibility within the organization that Hadoop is something that's going to help us solve some problems. Let's go invest time and effort into this, and realize that that was simply not a way to go forward. So we eventually, over time, started to call this our maturity model of customers trying to do BI on Hadoop. They started with putting data in Hadoop and exposing it through Hive. The next step was, and it's interesting that I think Paddy kind of just skipped past maturity model or step 2, which was, okay, so we understand that first way is not going to work. Let's go hire or train a bunch of MapReduce experts to pull data out of Hadoop and put it into my existing EDW.
That's what we do now.
And honestly, that works for certain use cases. It works if you know the data, if you have known data coming in, and you have the means and the experts to be able to do that. That works for certain use cases. But when it gets back to the kind of the maturity level 3, where you want to use Hadoop for the agility part that I was talking about before, and you realize that the data sets that are coming in are going to be changing quite often, that old model doesn't work either, because then you essentially have employed an entire software development organization to manage your data flow pipeline every single time it changes and to consistently update your EDW. And so, this is really a generic answer to your question, but I feel like it's funny because today there was a great, I don't know if you guys got to catch Merv Adrian's keynote on yesterday morning, but he kind of talked about how here in Silicon Valley we had this perception that everybody in the world is using Hadoop, and you're crazy if you're not. My mom's using Hadoop, et cetera. And but reality is that the vast majority of large enterprises aren't using Hadoop today and don't have a big data strategy yet. When I go out and I speak to a Fortune 500 CIO that is in that position, they are learning from these conversations that we're having right now, and they're saying, oh, so you're saying don't go through stage 0, stage 1, and stage 2, go ahead and jump ahead. And so I think there's a lot of learning to take away there. But at the same time, people also do need to kind of learn by kind of bashing their head into the wall every once in a while too.
And that's definitely a transformation that we've been seeing in the BI too, right? I mean, we did do that. We still do that. We export to Netezza, we export to Postgres, we export to Redshift, and now we have Platfora sitting on top of our Hadoop stack, and it's actually the only tool that sees all of the data. And that's where I'm getting our business analysts to start becoming agile. They can describe what they want in Platfora, and then if it needs to be something that is productionalized in a certain sense, or there's some crazy aggregates that we need to build, then we'll go build the ETL. Then we'll go get the Java developers involved. But if I can get the Java developers out of that sort of morass of never-ending work of building data marts, I mean, that's huge for us. You'll never catch up.
The next question that I wanted to ask, right? We've talked a little bit about infrastructure and getting to this point where you could do something better with your data, and we've talked about some of the use cases. Talk to us, talk to the audience a little bit about what you're actually now doing in BI. I think you were just, going in that direction, but you also made the comment a question ago about excitement was finally generated and people wanted to do something with the Hadoop cluster that you had. Talk about that actual business intelligence effort. What's going on inside of that, not just tools that you're using, but what kind of insights have you guys been able to derive that really have driven the traction? Either of you.
Sorry, you're looking at Paddy. So I think unlike many companies, Opower kind of jumped into Hadoop for an operational purpose first. And we were still continuing to do a lot of our BI in more traditional ways, sampling data, snapshotting data into Postgres, MySQL. We point Pentaho at InfoBright right now. And it wasn't scaling to do really interesting things. And I think the most interesting example for us, and also very important to our business, was Opower has been successful in both rolling our product out and as well as revenue, because we can prove by agreed upon statistical analysis processes that our program does work. Because in the end, we're just sending a piece of paper to a household, and then we tell our consumers that, our clients that they will change their behavior. So we have to be able to prove that that actually works. And we were able to successfully do that using the old BI ways, just to show that yes, consumers do reduce their energy, and they do it by 2%. But utilities don't really have incentive to reduce energy overall. They do have incentive, though, to reduce energy usage during peak times. These are generally in the afternoons when it's extremely expensive for utilities to keep up with demand with everyone's home. And so we always have a control group when we execute our energy efficiency programs. They're usually about 50,000 people, which is a lot. But if you want to be able to show peak reduction, you really can't sample even at those, you can't sample anything even for those size control groups. And so we didn't really have a way where we could prove that our programs were actually reducing peak until we actually put the data warehouse, we would put another Hadoop cluster, in fact, and this one is your more kind of traditional data warehousing cluster, and we were able to, move all of our, report generation data, all the communications we're sending to consumers and their usage and weather, and we were actually able to prove, I think November of last year, that the Opower program also reduces peak demand. And that was particularly important for us. One, it makes the product more interesting to utilities, but also we can also, assume more dollar savings as a result of that, because people that are on time of use rate plans are actually paying more during those times. And so we were able to have more accurate estimates of the amount of dollars we're saving utilities. So that was kind of the first kind of really great success story. And I think, I come from I was a MapReduce engineer. That was my title, as MapReduce engineer at Yahoo. And all I did was just write MapReduce jobs all the time. And of course I liked it, but engineers are all lazy. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I don't really want to do this all the time. Is there any way that I can actually, empower the people who want this data to be able to do it on themselves? And I think that's really where we're starting to see products like Platfora and like in DataMirror and some other things out there where you can actually give people access to the entire cluster, and they can generate BI insights on it, and hopefully don't screw the cluster up.
Yeah.
And certainly that latter part was actually very difficult. Whenever you self-serve Hadoop, some people do it well, but it's non-trivial. But and that's really where we're trying to go right now. We still, we're not as far as Paddy is on getting to our data warehouse to where we want it to be. We know that we're never going to have a single use case BI user. We're going to have people who can use Hive and our Hive. We're going to have people who want a graphical visualization tool. We're going to have people that want to use Pig. And we want to be able to support all of that as easily as possible. And so that's really where we're focusing on, is the data curation model of our data lake, so that we hopefully can layer on some of these new really interesting products that really empower BI users that don't really understand what's going on underneath the covers.
Yeah. Echoing that, sort of having multiple endpoints that people are using. So there is no one use case, right? There's so many different use cases. And it's interesting is that in getting to the point where it can support all those different use cases, our warehouse is not a cul-de-sac of data anymore. It's become a data source in a certain sense. It truly is like, it's integrated into our data publishing system. It's integrated, so we feed data back out to the website for all of our propensity models. So we have, purchase probability models and time to purchase models and article recommenders and vehicle recommenders, and all these machine learning algorithms that we couldn't have built before, honestly. Like we couldn't have scanned through all the data that we have now. And we wouldn't have been able to relate the data. So because we bring everything in, like literally all of the data at Edmunds is in, from editorial articles to car reviews to not the pictures, but everything is in there. And our machine learning scientists can actually walk from clickstream to a vehicle, from vehicle to active incentives, from a vehicle to transactions. They can look at how many people submitted leads and what transactions those resulted in. So they're able to walk a graph of data that they were never able to walk before. So that's wonderful for the machine learning guys. It's also great because we can take that same information and publish it out to our dealers, and we have a web application running on Mongo that our data warehouse is feeding directly. And then we also have like the Redshifts and the MicroStrategy and the Netezza and Platfora that our business users are using for different use cases. Most of the people at Edmunds, unless they're a Java engineer, aren't accessing Hadoop directly. So we don't have a lot of Pig, we don't have a lot of Hive. Actually, those use cases never really panned out for us. But everything that's in HDFS, for the most part, is copied into our Netezza appliance for people to do SQL on, and then MicroStrategy, obviously, and stuff like that runs on top of it. In terms of insights, Machine learning has been huge. Showing dealers days on lot versus price versus page views has also been an interesting one for them. And then for the business, all the A/B test dashboards that we've been building actually show 30-day predicted revenue on leads and ads and that thing. So none of those things we were able to do in the past. We had estimated revenue per page, but now that we can actually tie our Dart data to our page view data directly, we actually do real revenue per page. So, which is also how we caught a huge drop in our delivered page views, ad rate over the last 3 weeks when we moved to the new Dart platform.
Interesting. You guys both mentioned something that I think we should touch on, which is the skills. You mentioned skills from a platform perspective, and I think both of you are saying you had a plethora of job engineers. You probably shouldn't have said that out loud in case someone's trying to hire out there, but you had job engineers that you could use for the back end, and then from the front end, I kind of heard two extremes, right? One is, Drew, you were almost saying everyone's got their individual skill sets to do analytics or data science, and you're supporting them. And Paddy, you sounded like a little bit less than that there's a few modalities that you're actually supporting. Where do you think this is going to go for you guys from a skills perspective on the analytics side of things? You know, the business users or data analysts, what's going to change? Are you going to force a change in the makeup of skills on that side because of the technology choices you've made, or are you going to attempt to support, you know, the skills as they stand? Because those are two very different choices.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, you know, I think a year and a half ago, you come to a conference like this and everyone would say NoSQL. You'd see NoSQL everywhere and everyone was just going to abandon SQL because you know, it's not good. And now a year later, there's 5 SQL engines on top of HBase, right? And so I think what did we learn from that? Well, we've learned that people don't really want to change. Mm-hmm. And I know personally in my life that, you know, it's harder to make people change than it is to let them do what they're continuing to do. So to be honest, I really don't want people to have to change their skill sets too much, and at the same time, I want to empower as many people at Opower and even with internally at our utility partners to be able to leverage our data. And so I think, you know, that actually is one of the great parts of Hadoop is that there are many different ways into the system, and I think you know, tools that can, you know, are cohesive with each other, and I think Platfora's use of the Hive metastore is probably a great example of that, where, you know, the same people that are running Hive queries, the same people that are using Pig, and the same people that are using a BI tool are all using the same metadata, and they can even share that data across those. And so, you know, I don't really want to have people to change too much because, you know, they complain and then they complain to my manager, and, you know, there's more meetings as a result. So, you know, if we can figure out a way for them to be able to do their jobs, but use, you know, empowering, robust, scalable platforms, like that's just a win-win. And so that's really kind of the focus that I'm taking.
Yeah, I don't want people to have to change the way they do their jobs. I'd like it if they did, but they are who they are. It is interesting, though, is that while we do have sort of the traditional analyst kind of people that are using MicroStrategy and using whatever tools we build for them, that same group, as they've been getting exposed to more and more data, has changed the people that they're hiring. And I don't think it's something that was done consciously. It's just, as they get exposed to all these different tools, all of a sudden it becomes an imperative for them almost to start changing, because they can become so much more efficient, they can become so much, they can give us so much more benefit to the company by having a broader tool chest. So I've seen the business analyst team actually shifting over the last 18 months to becoming more technical, which was not something I was expecting.
Interesting. Peter, what do you see happening from that perspective, from a user's perspective with the BI tools, right? We've gone from, especially for all of us, that very traditional EDW world where the answer was the answer. If the data was unclean, fine, you had a bad answer, to a world where it's, I think, more of a Gaussian curve. The data that you're using, you talked about, you know, Paddy talked about ingesting some pretty diverse sets of data. So what are you seeing happening from that end user point of view on BI? How are people adapting to the fact that the data is giving you kind of an answer and you got to take some action on it?
Sure. I like to think of this this BI journey that we've been on over the last 30 years or so, where starting with Excel and spreadsheets, or Lotus 1-2-3 probably at the time, where you had tabular data, and eventually it got to the point where you had pivot tables and things like that, so you could look at things sliced and diced in a different way. Then to static reports, and then to interactive static reports, and then I think even in the last 5 years getting to a point where you've got this exploratory business intelligence where people can take some of the things like that you had in pivot tables but really apply it against some pre-structured data mart. And so that entire, during that spectrum, you have analysts who have had more access to data, and they've also had to allow themselves to imagine more what they could possibly do if they had that data. And I think that we're at this interesting point where I like to use, bear with me for 1 second on a metaphor. Have you guys seen the Truman Show, the movie The Truman Show? You know how Truman had the same thing every single day, his wife kissed him the same way and all these things, and all of a sudden, like one day he saw a crack and he's like, hold on, there's some world outside of this thing that's been given to me. And I think that that's kind of the moment that we're at right now, where our analysts are able to imagine a world outside of the data that IT has given them, outside of the structure that IT has given them, and all the things that they can do, adding new data sets together, exploring data, joined in different ways than the IT team had given to them. And so I think that, this is a obviously very lofty goal, but if we could hire more analysts that have more imagination and can think kind of outside of the world that IT has given them, I think it's going to empower some really great insights at companies.
That's a great way of putting it.
Very cool. Well, we're almost at the end of our time. I don't know if you guys have any other parting comments on experiences that you want to share. I think you've shared a lot of good and bad, but Drew, maybe a last thought on the next challenge that you're facing. How about that? What else do you have to do with Hadoop that's top of mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the next challenge we're facing has really been resonating a lot in this conference, which is, when you move to a self-serve model, it is challenging to guard resources and to keep clusters up in some cases where people can just go in and execute huge queries and huge analytics. And so, I think that's the challenge that we're trying to solve, and I think obviously a lot of people are trying to solve, but when that's solved, I think it's going to be great because all the things we're talking about can happen so much easily and so much more quickly and also in a more stable fashion.
Okay.
I think for us, the biggest challenge and the next place that we need to go is we've done a very good job with our structured data, getting that flowing pretty close to real time. But our clickstream data still is coming in on a nightly basis. And when we talk about agility, that is one place where we're falling down flat and we're not doing a very good job. So I'm looking forward in the next 6 or 8 months of refactoring that whole model for us and allowing the business to see the impact of their changes near immediately. I mean, they can push code changes within 45 minutes or so. Why can't they see the results of their change within 45 minutes? So that's really the next step for us, and it's been exciting actually being here and seeing how many different opportunities there are to make that happen. So.
Cool. Peter, any parting thoughts?
I'd like to thank you guys both for being here, of course, and all three of you. I would say there's, as I mentioned, back to Merv's point, we're in Silicon Valley and the world is not using Hadoop yet. Just a lot of people who are forward thinking and want to get the best out of technology. How do we bridge that gap? And I think that there's still a lot of things in the platform that would have the next 65% of enterprises, like what's holding them back? Security, permissions, data lineage, provenance, and I can go on and on and on. A lot of things that we need to do to make this a better platform. And I mean the entire Hadoop platform and everything from Hadoop all the way up. So I'm looking forward to that over the next couple years and getting the rest of the majority on board.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your time, and thanks to the audience for hanging out with us.
Thanks.
Use it or lose it, they say. So let's let him go for a season and start making sense. It's time to commence. Let's start making sense today.